Thank you so much, Father Jerry. I'm excited to be here today. He won't say this, but I'm the runner-up. We were trying to get a bishop to do this, and that's fine. I'm used to it. I'm used to being the runner-up. So that's good. So this is what I want to do in the time that we have this morning. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about who we are. What's the Catholic Climate Covenant? What do we do? What are we about? Where we are in terms of climate change. And again, I know most of you know this pretty well. I folded into this presentation some snappy little videos to help illustrate the point a little bit more, so you'll see some of those. What does it mean for us today and in the future? And I'm going to focus kind of on three issues: water, food, and migration. We're going to talk about natural disasters and what that means for us now and in the future. I'm going to give three examples of some impacts. So we'll look at those. I'm going to talk about some good news, because the first part of this is going to be kind of a bummer. This hopefully the last third or so will offer some good news. Talk a little bit about the encyclical and what I expect, what you expect out of it. And then tell you what the covenant, what our organization is trying to do around the encyclical. And then I'll close it out with a little, hopefully have some time for a little bit of inspiration, because most of the first part is inspirational. So who are we? So the Catholic Climate Covenant is an organization of organizations. We're a network of networks. And these are the organizations from the Bishops' Conference, two departments within the Bishops' Conference, Catholic colleges and universities, and I'm not going to read the whole list. There's 14 groups. They essentially form our board. Steve Kalecki, as Father Jerry mentioned, is the head of the International Justice and Peace Office at the Bishops' Conference, and he is the chairman of our board. So we stay connected to the Bishops' Conference, which gives us a lot of ways to get into dioceses and parishes and so forth, because we have that imprimatur, I suppose, of the Bishops' Conference. One of the things that many of you probably know, and if you don't know, you'll get a chance to know it. One of the things that we promote is the St. Francis Pledge to Care for Creation and the Poor. And my colleague Lonnie Ellis, in the blue shirt there in the back of the room, there's a way, if you haven't signed up to get our bi-weekly email, you can do so. But we actually have a little treat for you today. Sign up again. We'll double check your name so you don't get two emails, but sign up again, and the people from the parishes with the highest turnout will get a copy of this great little book from David Trosh called 77 Ways to Save Money and Energy at Your Church or School. Okay, little gift. How about that? Huh? You thought you were coming just for donuts.
Make sure you write your parish name on here.
Yeah, somewhere on that sign-up sheet, write your parish name. So we have a couple of clipboards. We can start passing those around, and you can do that while I babble on. Let's see. So notice that it's about care for creation and care for the poor. So it's not just about the polar bears. It's also about people. I think the Catholic Church always works best when it's both and. So it's both creation and people, and especially poor people. And the way you take the St. Francis Pledge, or the St. Francis Pledge is 5 things. It's to pray, learn, assess, act, and advocate. So pray about climate change, learn about both climate change and Catholic teaching on climate change, assess your own impact, act on that assessment, and then finally be a voice for those who don't have a voice at the table when these decisions about climate change, adaptation, mitigation, when those things are happening, you can help us and help the world really adapt and move into a new kind of economy. They're not multiple choice. You're supposed to do all 5 of them when you take the pledge. Nobody's going to check up on you. That's why we call it the covenant, because it's between you and your Creator. But if you haven't signed up, please do so. And sign up again so you can get the book. Your parish can get the book. What the Catholic Climate Covenant really is trying to do is it's trying to implement the Bishop's Statement from 2001. How many of you know that the bishops wrote this statement in 2001? Wow, so there's quite a few who haven't. There's a link to it on our website, there's a link to it on the bishop's website. Just look up global climate change, a plea for dialogue, prudence, and the common good. It's an excellent statement. It really is. It could have been written today, but it was written 15 years ago, or 14 years ago. So it's a really great statement, and our role is to try to implement that. But we're not the only ones who have, or the bishops rather, aren't the only ones who have talked about climate change. In 2011, the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences came out with this wonderful statement on glaciers. And it is basically, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences is among the premier academies of sciences in the world. On that academy are Nobel laureates, really very smart people, way smarter than me. And they wrote this statement on glaciers, and basically saying that the world, that all the glaciers around the world are losing mass, losing ice, losing water, creating flooding situations. When they're gone, think of the Himalaya Kush region and all the glaciers and the billions of people who rely on that water. When those are gone, what's going to happen to those people? So that was the focus of this statement. But our church has been at this a while. The thing that I think we forget is we have forgotten that we've been at this a while. I like to tell people that that really we've been at this for about 3,400 years, going back to Genesis. Earth Day is 45 years old this year. So we've been at this a long time, way longer than most people realize. We have been called to care for creation, to tend it, to protect it, to cultivate it, to help it to grow, which is what Pope Francis has said just recently. So we've been at it a while. The Catholic bishops, again, I'm referring to their 2001 statement, says, our tradition calls us to protect the life and dignity of the human person, and it is increasingly clear that this task cannot be separated from the care and defense of all of creation. Actually, that's from their statement in 1991 called Renewing the Earth. And then on the climate change statement, they said responses to global climate change should reflect our interdependence and common responsibility for the future of the planet. In the statement, the bishop's statement in 2001, there are three key themes. And I think these themes are so important, and they continue to help chart a way forward for us as we deal with climate change. The first is prudence. Now, this statement was written in 2001, and in 2001, the third assessment from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just came out, which was pretty certain that humans were causing climate change, but not as certain as subsequent statements by the IPCC. But even at that point, the bishop said, look, we know enough that we know we need to act. And prudence says that in a situation with less than full certainty, where the consequences of not acting are serious, justifies, indeed can obligate our taking action intended to avert potential disasters and dangers. The second key theme in the statement from the bishops of 2001 is poverty. And they say any successful strategy must also reflect the genuine participation and concerns of those most affected and least able to bear the burdens. This is a moral and political necessity. And then finally, the common good. That is not a word you hear very often these days, and certainly in this society. But the bishops are saying that responses to global climate change should reflect our interdependence and common responsibility for the future of our planet. Individual nations must measure their own self-interest against the greater common good and contribute equitably to global solutions. So it's not just self-interest, it's all of us. We all have to be a part of it. So let me shift quickly here to where we are today and kind of what the scientists are telling us about global climate change. So many of you have seen this chart. This is CO2 over time. You know, they drill into these ice cores and some of the big ice masses, Antarctica, Greenland, and they can actually go down so far that they can get 600,000 years of data, which is astonishing to me in and of itself. And you can see that over the years, CO2 has gone up and down, and you could overlay a temperature chart on top of this as well. You'll see temperatures going in lockstep with CO2. So 1950, we were about the highest peak that has ever been recorded, and now we're up here, somewhere around 400 parts per million in CO2, parts per billion, I think it is. Is that right? Who's the scientist in the room? Billion. Million, thank you. That would make a difference, wouldn't it? Anyway, so, but you can see what's that? We're blasting through it. We're just totally blasting through it. So we have some responsibility to try to help bring that back down. So one of the snappy little YouTube videos, if it actually is going to work. All these little dicey here. Come on. Give it a minute, I'll change pages here. I love these awkward moments. And then they work. Let's see if this one, no. Well, maybe I should see if I'm still connected to the internet. Looks like we are. Anybody got a story they want to share?
Up to this point, you did all this work, right?
Yeah,
This is somebody else.
this is somebody else.
You done good.
Come on.
Open a separate web browser.
You think that'll work? I think it's connected. It's just taking a sweet time.
Yeah, this is my
All right. Maybe we'll come back to those. They're really nice videos. One was the global temperatures over time. So it's a map, and you can see it getting redder and redder. The other was the Arctic ice melt. And I've seen these recently, and the Arctic ice cap melt is pretty dramatic. In fact, the scientists are telling us that it's melting at about 19% a year. So it's very dramatic, and the video can demonstrate that if we can ever get back to it. But what does this all mean? So we know that in rural areas that fishing and farming and forestry are under stress. They'll continue to be under stress. Those people then move to urban centers, swelling the population of those centers, then there's more demand on housing, food, water resources, and there's also the potential for diseases, more diseases. Both are threatened, both rural areas and urban areas are going to be threatened from prolonged heat waves, larger storms, and so forth. In fact, if you look at the water stresses, in 2080, under a relatively moderate climate scenario projection, look at the areas that are going to be stressed for water. A little bit in the United States, Central America, look at Africa. And every scientist, as they project the climate outwards, Africa is really going to get hit hard. And of course, they have what? The fewest resources to withstand what's coming. So we have to keep that in mind, and certainly as people of faith. But all over the globe, almost all over the globe, there's a lot of stresses on water. Another stress is going to be migration. This is from 2012. So this is a graphic showing all of the migration that had happened in 2012 by country. And it's interesting that the United States is one of the darker areas. So this is least stressed, more stress, or least migration, more migration, heavy migration, super migration with the stripes. United States, what was that? Hurricane Sandy. Lots of people displaced because of Hurricane Sandy. Again, Africa is getting hit pretty hard. We've got Pakistan getting hit by lots of typhoons. Same with Bangladesh. Bangladesh is in the bullseye as well. China had a bunch of major weather events, significant weather events. Papua New Guinea, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But Papua New Guinea got hit pretty hard. But almost in so these are people who have to leave their homes for some reason for some time. So it might be a few days, it might be forever. But those are, and that's only supposed to get worse. There's lots of migration that's going to happen because of climate change. And then agriculture. Once again, this is just basically this is the production of corn projected out to 2050, I think. Is that right? Yeah, 2050. And this again is this is one of the scenarios, the A1F. It basically means that we're going to continue to burn fossil fuels. So this is like one of the worst case scenarios. But essentially, you can see any place that's red is a decrease by 20 to 30% decrease in production of these crops, of corn in particular. So even the United States is going to suffer a bit. Of course, Canada is going to be doing great. Looks like Brazil's going to be doing great, but I don't know what does that mean for Brazil or for Canada. How much more forest lands are we going to have to destroy in order to plant the things that we're going to need to eat? And then what does that do to climate change? So there's lots of, everything's tied together here, right? So there are some people who are paying very close attention to natural disasters. And the reinsurance companies in particular. So here's Munich Re. This is one of the biggest, these are the insurance companies that insure the insurance companies. So if you look at this chart, you can see that on the bottom here are geophysical events. So those would be volcanoes, earthquakes, and you know, that's a fairly steady line. When you go to meteorological events such as tropical storms, winter storms, thunderstorms, that's the green. That line is going up. If you look at hydrological events, a lot of water, rain, flooding, so forth, that's the gray. There's the obvious trend there. And then extreme temperatures, droughts, and forest fires. So these are the hot events. That's the orange. It's a little less clear that that's actually moving up unless you take a look at it from 1980 to, say, 2011. So the insurance companies certainly are paying attention to climate change because they have to pay out when these disasters happen. So that's thought that was interesting. The way Catholic Relief Services looks at this, they look at shocks and stresses. So shocks are these short-term temporary things. So you get a big drought or a massive flood, too much rain, too little rain. So those are shocks to the system. And they're looking at this, of course, from primarily an agricultural point of view. What's happening to people who are subsistence farmers, what's happening in some of the cities as well as people suffer these shocks. And then the trends. So the trends are how frequently are these things happening? You know, what's instead of a 50-year flood, you get those 50-year floods every 10 years. That's a trend. And there's droughts and deserts growing, especially in the places where CRS works. A lot of those. So essentially, that's one way to look at it. You get these shocks. That's when CRS goes into a country and tries to help the immediate crisis. But then they're also looking at these trends. What's happening long term, and how can we help low-income people deal with what's coming? So three examples that I want to highlight. The first is the Arab Spring. So if you look at this chart, and let's see if I can bring it in a little closer. So this is basically, this line is the price of wheat, okay, the red line. So when it was very high, back here in 2008, there were some riots in Africa, Somalia, Mauritania, so mostly in Africa. Then crops started growing better. We had more wheat, price comes down. Here's the financial crisis. Then there's a lot more droughts. Right in here is where there was those massive forest fires in 2010 in Russia. Russia, because of, it hit their wheat belt. Because of that, they stopped exporting wheat. They said, we need all the wheat for our own people. What's that going to do? It's going to drive prices up, right? At the same, almost right after the big fires, there were those massive floods in Pakistan. 1 million tons of grain reserves were destroyed. Price goes up further. Fast forward to the Arab Spring. The price of wheat was the price of bread was becoming so expensive in primarily importing countries like Egypt, that people were starting to grumble. Now that wasn't, obviously, I'm not saying that was the only impact or the only reason that the Arab Spring started, but it was a factor. Governments weren't taking care of their own because the price of wheat was going up. There's some political corruption involved, of course, and some dictatorships and so forth. But it certainly contributed to the dissatisfaction that those people had, and so they began to rise up. The same thing happened in Syria. Syria was suffering through multi-year droughts right before the civil war started. So that a lot of people from rural areas moved into the cities. The government wasn't taking care of them in any real fashion. They got radicalized, and so you begin to have a civil war. So these are the types of things that we're looking at in the future. Okay. I don't know, did anybody do the Sun Come Up program that we put together a few years ago? The video. Everybody remember that? Wow. Two people. So you should have all done it. So a few years. So we've been trying to produce this Feast of St. Francis program every year for the last few years. And 3 years ago, so this would have been 2012, we put together. We purchased a bunch of videos called. The video was called "Sun Come Up," and it basically depicted the Carteret Islanders. Now, the Carteret Islanders are part of Papua New Guinea. There's a little volcanic atoll of islands in the South Pacific. There's about 3,000 people that live on the islands. The movie depicts them realizing that they have to begin to relocate because their islands are disappearing. Part of that is due to climate change. Part of that is due simply to subsidence. The islands are sinking. Coral reefs are being destroyed, which allows water to come in and erode the soil. But they realize that their time is up. So still on? Yeah. They realized that their time was up. So the movie shows a group of them traveling 50 miles over open ocean to the island of Bougainville, and Bougainville is one of the islands of Papua New Guinea. They show these folks moving from town to town asking for a place to live. So they need property, they need to move from the island. The last scene was, in fact, a Catholic church that said, yes, we're going to give you some land, you can live here. Turns out that the bishop, that's Bishop Bernard Nabali up here, he said, we got to help these people. So the Diocese of Bougainville is actually helping to relocate some of these people, not all of them, onto the island of Bougainville. So, this is the island. You can see that the trees are disappearing, water's encroaching, and here they are trying to adjust to their new life in Bougainville. It's a wonderful story in the sense that it's the Catholic Church taking care of its own, and most of the people on the Carteret Islands are Catholic as well. But it's sad because this is happening all over the world. There's 1,200 islands in the Maldives. They're all going to disappear. Where are those people going to go? Australia, India, maybe. So we're going to have to start taking in climate refugees around the world. And many of you have heard that the situation, the war that happened in the Sudan and the Darfur region, a lot of people say that was the first real climate conflict. So the theory is that there's some pastoral people with sheep and goats and stuff. The desert was encroaching into their pastoral lands, so they moved into the farming lands, and then there are different tribes, and that started the whole conflict. That may or may not be true, but what is true, and this Scientific America article points this out, is that as temperatures increase, if the crops can't withstand those temperature increases, then the crops begin to fail. So it's a little bit of a combination of this conflict between whether you're a sheep herder or a farmer, but it also, the farmers themselves are under stress. All of that creates some tension, and that tension is only going to grow as the planet warms. I'm just going to go back and see if these videos are working. It's like the best part of the whole show. least we know. This is so disappointing. Anyway, all right. Maybe we'll try it again. Okay, that's the bummer part of the talk. Now we'll get to the happier part of the talk. There's still a lot of work to do. This is the good news, really. So, in every area, more and more people are realizing that we're in a bit of a pickle here. So we have all of these companies who are looking at. A lot of these companies, of course, are insurance companies. So they're looking at how can they. Companies are beginning to think about. Successful companies always plan into the future. So a lot of companies are saying, this climate thing is going to hurt our bottom line. How do we get out in front of it? So they're beginning to plan for it. You're going to see a lot more of that. A lot of our colleges and universities are putting a lot of money into research around the issue, whether it's renewables, how do you plant crops differently, how do you modify or breed crops that can withstand droughts or floods and so forth. So a lot of that's happening. In China, the air is so thick that people are beginning to complain because they're putting up a coal plant every 2 weeks, a coal-fired power plant. The air is just impossible. So China's beginning to realize we can't continue like this. So the people's lived experience. I think Walt's going to talk about the national security implications, but believe me, and you probably know this living in Northern Virginia, but the military is very concerned about climate change because of the threats to our own national security and to having to go to places like Syria or Sudan or other places where there are conflicts that threaten our national security. There's a lot of filmmakers looking at this. There was that whole series on Showtime called Years of Living Dangerously. The Chasing Ice film, if you haven't seen that, it's excellent. Talks about this glacier issue. It's really well done. We have the poster child, the polar bear. People are realizing more and more that there are species that are being threatened, both animals and plants. And then this graph up here just basically shows how businesses are beginning to think about this. How much change and how much risk and which quadrant do they fit in? I don't understand all that stuff because my business degree was a long time ago. And then, of course, there's groups doing stuff like us, Green Faith, Interfaith Power Light has a table over there. Lots of faith groups are doing lots of things on this issue. And, of course, the most exciting thing for us is, before I get to that, first of all, this is exciting though too. We are a huge church. Now, I just want you to consider these numbers for a minute. This is the Catholic Church just in the United States. We're about 23% of the population, 75 million of us, 195 dioceses, somewhere in the neighborhood of 17,500 parishes, 220-something colleges and universities, 6,800 elementary and secondary schools. We own, nobody knows, nobody's counted them, we're guesstimating, about 70,000 buildings. Imagine if each building could reduce its energy use by 10%, which folks, that's turning lights and computers off. That's lowering the thermostat in the summer, raising it in the winter, lowering it in the winter, raising it in the summer. You can get to 10%, any building can get to 10% energy savings just by doing some of those things. Then you caulk, then you insulate, maybe you get solar eventually. But just think about that, 70,000 buildings, what a footprint we have. We can do something about that. If 5% of the Catholic population were active on this issue, we'd be 3 times bigger than World Wildlife Fund's membership in this country. Just 5% of us. Now, of course, there's the old joke. How many people are Catholic? Do you mean going to church? Or do you so that number could whittle down a little bit, but it'd still be a big number, right? So, okay, now of course, here we go. There's this encyclical coming out. When this was announced a year ago, it was like birthday and Christmas all rolled up into one for me. We were so excited about it, and we keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally the Pope, when he was in Asia, said June, July is when it's going to be released. So we're gearing up to do that. This is big, right? First of all, it's an encyclical, which is among the highest levels of teaching authority of the Catholic Church. Secondly, it's Pope Francis, who's got to be the most popular person on the planet. And that's big. That's big news. So it's both the message and the messenger. The Vatican is moving towards carbon neutrality, first nation in the world to do that. Not a really tiny nation, but we'll take it. That's the Paul VI Center with a solar array that powers that. They have some carbon offsets that they use, what they can't save by energy. Now, I've been to the Vatican, and frankly, it doesn't look like it's all that energy efficient, but we're going to say it is anyway. So it's both the message and the messenger. What is he going to say? I have no idea. But we kind of know what's been said in the past by both Pope Francis, and before him, Benedict, and before him, John Paul II. In fact, climate change has been talked about by church leaders and other leaders for many years. I just found out, there was a piece, I think it was, I don't know, it was a blog or something I read. President Johnson in 1965 talked about climate change. So it's not like this is new. So this is one of the quotes from Pope Francis. St. Francis of Assisi bears witness to the need to respect all that God has created and as he created it, without manipulating and destroying creation, rather to help it grow. That's a theme you're going to hear, I think. To become more beautiful and more like what God created it to be. And above all, St. Francis witnessed to the respect for everyone. He testifies that each of us is called to protect our neighbor, that the human person is at the center of creation, and the place where God, our Creator, willed that we should be, not at the mercy of the idols we have created. So, I'm hoping he says something like that. I'm hoping he takes what Pope Benedict has said and some reformulates it or says it exactly like this, which was, this is again Pope Benedict, I would advocate the adoption of a model of development based on the centrality of the human person, on the promotion and sharing of the common good, on responsibility, on a realization of our need for a changed lifestyle, and on prudence, the virtue which tells us what needs to be done today in view of what might happen tomorrow. So again, that word prudence comes in there. We have to begin to think about authentic human development. There's going to be this interplay between human ecology and natural ecology. To put it in the vernacular, we got to get our own spiritual act together if we're going to be able to save the planet, and vice versa. So what will it mean when the encyclical comes out? What's it going to mean? Some people are going to gloat. Pope has finally joined the Democratic Party. It's not. I'm telling you, it's not going to be a political statement. It's going to be a pastoral document. Okay, let's all agree that that's what this is going to be. It will have moral and political, social, economic implications, but it's a pastoral statement. Others are going to grumble. They're going to attack. We've already seen it. They're going to attack the Pope. He's divisive. He's from Argentina. What do you expect? Those kinds of things, right? Or they're going to minimize the importance of an encyclical letter, which is really hard to do if you know what an encyclical letter is. Okay? I hope a lot more people are going to say, wow, I didn't know that the church was even cared about this issue. So I'm hoping much more of that happens. He has said publicly that he intends this to influence the Paris talks. So this is the next round of climate negotiations in Paris next year. He's trying to, so it has political implications. He's coming to talk to Congress. My thing to Boehner and Pelosi is, careful what you wish for. But he's intending this to raise those moral consequences of not acting and not doing something about climate change, and that is intended to influence the talks in Paris. What happens at those talks are the poor nations tend to get marginalized, and the big powers do all the talking. They do all the negotiating. He's trying to change that dynamic with this statement. So let me begin to wrap up. So what are we doing as a covenant? We're trying to develop some key messages around this, and we're trying to create a narrative, a true narrative, okay? We're not going to try to say something that this is not, but we know that this is not new teaching. This has been, the care for creation has been talked about against since Genesis. This is not new for us. These are not new issues. The climate change issue has been around a long time. Scientists back at the turn of the 19th century were talking about climate change. 1900s rather. We're talking about climate change. It's about God's creation. It's not about our creation. All of this belongs to God. We are simply here a short time to be caretakers, to help, to protect the environment, to help it grow, to love one another, and to love God's creation. This is a pastoral statement. I said that already. This is a pastoral statement first. It's about people, especially poor people. That's what that's supposed to say. And that there are solutions. When we come together, we can solve this. We have a lot of activities planned. We're trying to get a press conference the day of that it's released here in Washington by a high-level church leader. We're training bishops, heads of hospitals, heads of colleges and universities, other Catholic leaders on. We're doing some media training with them to make sure that they stay on message. We're producing a day of video, so we're going to have the first video out the gate. Again, we don't know what's going to be in the encyclical, but we kind of, I mean, precisely, but we know what the themes are going to be. So we're going to develop a video around that theme. We're developing homilies around the summer and give those to all of the pastors in the country so that they can, just some outlines that they can use. We're trying to develop some energy reduction strategies that parishes and schools and other Catholic groups can use. We're going to do a series of 6 to 10 media events around the country where we're going to go to a diocese, we're going to have the bishop, we're going to have someone local to talk about how climate has impacted them, and we're going to drive media to those to try to continue to say that this is what this statement is, to try to keep it in the public eye for as long as we can. And then we're developing education programs. This week I was up in New Jersey working with Renew International. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that organization. We're developing with them and with Green Faith, another group, a 12-week, 6 in the fall, 6 in the spring, parish program, small group reflection process. So we're developing those as well. So, the big finish. Thank goodness. Pope Benedict rather said at one point, he said, our lives are a journey from God and back to God. And how we live that journey is really important. And in the context of climate change and what we know, it's even more critically important. Over the past summer, I read a book called The Boys in the Boat, 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's by Daniel Brown, not the one of fame, but the different one. And he profiles Joe Rance, who's a member of that gold medal crew team from the University of Washington, West Coast Washington. Brown's description of the medal race near Berlin is heart-stopping as he brilliantly describes and captures the euphoric consolation that comes from a years-long pursuit of a common good and the self-emptying struggle that creates, rowing and rowing and rowing for a medal. And here's the way Brown describes Joe Rance's reflection sitting in his boat, the Husky Clipper, at the end of the Olympic race. He says, immediately after the race, even as he sat gasping for air in the Husky Clipper, while it drifted down the Langer Sea beyond the finish line, an expansive sense of calm had enveloped him. In the last desperate few hundred meters of the race, in searing pain and bewildering noise of that final furious sprint, there had come a singular moment when Joe realized with startling clarity that there was nothing more he could do to win the race beyond what he was already doing, except for one thing. He could finally abandon all doubt, trust absolutely without reservation that he and the boy in front of him and the boys behind him would all do precisely what they needed to do at precisely the right instant they needed to do it. He had known in that instant that there could be no hesitation, no shred of indecision. He had no choice but to throw himself into each stroke as if he were throwing himself off a cliff into a void with unquestioned faith that the others would be there to save him from catching the whole weight of the shell on his blade. And he had done it over and over, 44 times per minute. He had hurled himself blindly into his future, not just believing, but knowing that the other boys would be there for him. All of them, moment by precious moment. In the white-hot emotional furnace of those final meters at Grinnell, Joe and the boys had finally forged the prize they had sought all season. The prize Joe had sought nearly all his life. Now he felt whole. Now he was ready to go home. We are so blessed to be able to do this work, to be out there sharing Catholic social teaching, to organize for justice, to make our communities, our nation, and our world a little better place. Often our efforts seem futile and painful and slow, but every now and then we get a breakthrough and we can celebrate a modest victory. But we must remember that we're not alone, although I would agree that there are far too few of us doing this work. But in our best moments, we do this work out of a place of trust. Trust in God, trust in one another, trust that we are trying to follow a path back to God from whom we came. So regardless of the issue that gives you passion and righteous anger, be it the assaults on human life in the womb or on death row, be it human trafficking, hunger, homelessness, be it immigration, war and conflict, or be it a world and future generations threatened by climate change. Whatever your issue, let's resolve right now to throw ourselves into these projects. Let's commit to support and challenge one another. Let's go on this journey together, unafraid, and with the full knowledge that not only is God there for us, but there is someone in front of us and in back of us, pulling just as hard and willing to follow us into the void. And only then, when we have finished the race, when our journey has ended, then it will be time to go home, and we will have done a good job. Thank you.